As the day fades and quiet settles in, the story of the Trojan War waits patiently, not demanding attention, but offering it. This is not a tale meant to rush or overwhelm. It is an ancient story worn smooth by centuries of retelling, softened by time, and carried forward by human memory. Tonight, it unfolds slowly. The Trojan War exists in a space between history and myth. It is remembered not through stone inscriptions or royal decrees alone, but through poetry, through voices reciting verses beneath open skies, through stories passed from one generation to the next. Whether every detail happened exactly as told matters less than the truth the story reveals about human nature, pride, love, grief, loyalty, and loss. Imagine the Aegean Sea at dusk. The water darkens to deep blue, the horizon blurs, and distant ships rock gently at anchor. Somewhere beyond that horizon stands the city of Troy, its walls catching the last light of the sun. For now, the city is calm. Long before the first spear was raised, the ancient Greek world was already shaped by alliances, rivalries, and fragile peace. Kings ruled from stone halls, their power measured not only in land and soldiers, but in reputation and honor. Across the Aegean, small kingdoms traded, feasted, argued, and remembered old grudges. Troy stood at a crossroads of this world. Positioned near the narrow straits connecting the Aegean to the Black Sea, it was wealthy and well fortified. Merchants passed through its gates, ships anchored nearby. Its people were accustomed to prosperity and relative peace. Troy was not isolated. It was connected, known, respected. Across the sea lay Mycenaean Greece. Powerful kings ruled cities like Mycenae, Sparta, Pylos, and Ithaca. They shared language and customs, but rivalry simmered beneath the surface. Alliances were fragile. Honor was everything. The Greeks believed the gods watched closely over all of this. Every oath, every insult, every promise mattered. The ancient poets tell us that the Trojan War began not with anger, but with celebration. The wedding of Peleus, a mortal hero, and Thetis, a sea goddess, was meant to be a moment of harmony. Gods and mortals gathered together. Music filled the air. Wine flowed freely. Laughter echoed across the halls. But one figure was not invited. Eris, the goddess of discord, arrived silently and left behind a single object, a golden apple. Upon it were carved 3 simple words. For the fairest. 3 goddesses claimed the apple. Hera, queen of the gods. Athena, goddess of wisdom and war. Aphrodite, goddess of love. Unable to decide among themselves, they turned to a mortal judge, Paris, a prince of Troy. Paris was young, thoughtful, and unaware that the choice placed before him would shape the fate of countless lives. Each goddess offered him a gift. Hera promised power. Athena offered wisdom and victory. Aphrodite offered love, the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Helen of Sparta was known across the Greek world for her beauty, but she was also bound by oaths older than Paris himself. When she had chosen her husband, Menelaus, the kings of Greece had sworn to defend that marriage. It was a promise meant to prevent war. When Paris arrived in Sparta, he was welcomed as a guest. Hospitality was sacred. But when he departed, Helen went with him. Whether by persuasion, desire, or divine influence remains uncertain. Menelaus returned to an empty palace. The oaths were remembered. Messengers were sent. Kings gathered reluctantly, knowing what honoring their word would cost. Ships were built. Soldiers were called. The Aegean began to fill with sails. The war did not begin in anger alone, but in obligation. The Greek army was unlike any force assembled before it. Each king arrived with his own men, his own ambitions, his own pride. Agamemnon of Mycenae commanded the largest force. Menelaus stood beside him, driven by loss. Odysseus of Ithaca came reluctantly, already thinking several steps ahead. Achilles arrived young and unmatched, his name already whispered with awe. Each man carried a story. Each would leave one behind. On the shores of Troy, the Greek ships came to rest. The sea was calm. The walls of Troy stood firm. Between them stretched years of conflict not yet imagined. For now, both sides waited. When the Greek ships first landed on the shores near Troy, many believed the conflict would be brief. A show of force, a decisive clash, a quick victory. But wars rarely follow the expectations set upon them, and the Trojan War would stretch not for weeks or months, but for years. 10 long years, marked more by waiting than by battle. Each morning rose gently over the plain of Troy. The sun climbed slowly, warming tents, armor, and the quiet earth between the Greek camp and the city's towering walls. Soldiers woke to routine, sharpening weapons, mending armor, preparing meals. The rhythm of life settled into repetition, almost peaceful in its predictability. From the walls of Troy, defenders watched the camp below. They saw the smoke of cooking fires, the movement of men, the glint of bronze in the sunlight. And behind those walls, the city lived on. Markets opened. Children learned trades. Elders spoke of earlier days, when Troy had known only prosperity. The war had begun. Among the Greeks, no figure loomed larger than Achilles. Young, swift, unmatched in battle, he was both a weapon and a warning. His presence alone shifted the balance of power. The Trojans feared him. The Greeks relied upon him. Agamemnon, king of Mycenae and leader of the Greek coalition, understood Achilles' value, but he also understood power and pride. When conflict arose between the two men, it was not over strategy or survival, but honor. A dispute over spoils, symbols of status and recognition, grew into a rift that shook the Greek camp. Achilles withdrew from battle, refusing to fight. His absence was felt immediately. Greek lines faltered. Confidence waned. The war, once distant, crept closer. Within Troy, Hector stood as the city's shield. Prince, warrior, son, husband, he carried many roles and carried them quietly. Where Achilles was fire, Hector was stone, steady, grounded, resolute. Hector fought not for glory alone, but for home. Each time he passed through the Scaean gate, he looked upon the faces of those he protected. His wife Andromache, his young son Astyanax, his aging parents, their presence anchored him. As Greek pressure increased, Hector led counterattacks, pushing the enemy back, burning ships, reminding the Greeks that Troy would not fall easily. His courage sustained the city, even as exhaustion grew. In the ancient telling, the gods did not remain distant observers. They took sides. They intervened. They argued among themselves as fiercely as mortals did below. Athena favored the Greeks. Apollo protected Troy. Aphrodite watched over Paris. Zeus weighed the fates carefully, knowing that even gods could not escape destiny. Storms rose unexpectedly. Arrows flew true or missed by inches. Strength surged or failed without explanation. To the people of the time, these were not coincidences, but signs. The war unfolded not only on Earth, but in the unseen spaces above it. As the war dragged on, losses mounted. The Greeks, pressed hard by Trojan advances, found themselves near collapse. In desperation, Patroclus, Achilles' closest companion, entered the battle wearing Achilles' armor. For a time, the deception worked. The Trojans retreated, believing Achilles had returned. Hope flickered, but Patroclus fell. His death rippled through both armies. For Achilles, it shattered. Achilles returned to battle like a storm unleashed. Nothing stood before him. When he met Hector outside the walls of Troy, the moment felt suspended in time. Their duel was swift and final. Hector fell. Troy mourned. Achilles, still consumed by grief, showed no mercy, even in victory. The cost of the war revealed itself not only in death, but in what it stripped away from the living. And yet, even after such moments, life continued. Bodies were burned. Truces were called. The dead were honored. Mothers wept. Fathers stood in silence. Nights returned, calm and star-filled, as if the world itself sought to soothe what humans had broken. The war was nearing its end, but not yet. As the war reached its final years, the rhythm of battle slowed, not because peace was near, but because exhaustion had settled over both sides. The plain before Troy bore the marks of time, trampled earth, scattered stones, the faint outlines of old camps and abandoned fires. Men on both sides had grown older here. Some had arrived as youths, and now carried streaks of gray in their hair. It was during this quiet weariness that a different kind of idea emerged. Odysseus of Ithaca, long known for his careful mind rather than brute strength, began to see what others could not. Troy had not fallen to force. It had endured every assault, every siege, every challenge of arms. The walls still stood. The gates still closed each night. The city could not be taken from without, so the war would end from within. The plan was simple in appearance, but heavy with consequence. A great wooden horse would be built, tall enough to be seen from Troy's walls, hollowed within and left behind. It would stand silently, offering confusion instead of threat. For days the Greeks labored. Wood was shaped carefully. The horse took form beneath steady hands. It was not rushed. Every joint mattered. Every detail carried weight. Inside, a small group of warriors would hide, waiting in darkness, breath held, listening. When the work was complete, the Greek camp changed. Fires were extinguished. Tents were dismantled. Ships vanished beyond the horizon. Silence returned to the shore. From the walls, the Trojans watched in disbelief. The enemy gone, the shore empty. Only the horse remained, standing alone beneath the open sky. Debate filled the city. Some urged caution, others believed the war had finally ended. The horse was examined, discussed, argued over. Warnings were spoken and dismissed. Relief dulled suspicion. At last, the decision was made. The horse was brought into Troy. As night fell, celebrations began. Wine flowed. Songs echoed through streets. For the first time in years, the city slept without fear of attack, and within the horse, warriors waited. When the city finally grew quiet, when lamps dimmed and voices faded, the horse opened. One by one, the Greeks emerged, careful, deliberate, silent. Gates were opened. Signals were given. The ships returned. The sack of Troy unfolded in darkness and fire. Confusion spread faster than alarm. Defenders rushed from sleep into chaos. Homes burned. The great city fell not in a single moment, but in a cascade of irreversible acts. The war ended, not with triumph, but with ruin. With Troy destroyed, the Greeks did not find peace. Victory did not restore what had been lost. Instead, it scattered them. Some never returned home. Others wandered for years. Odysseus would sail for a decade more. Agamemnon would meet tragedy upon his return. The war followed them, quietly, into the rest of their lives. The Trojan War ended, but its echoes did not. The story of the Trojan War endured because it spoke softly to something universal. It was not merely about heroes and gods, but about time. How long conflicts last, how slowly they begin, and how deeply they mark those who live through them. It reminded listeners that even the greatest walls can fall, that pride carries weight, and that cleverness can be as powerful as strength. For centuries, poets recited its verses beneath stars, much like those that once shone over Troy. And now, as this long journey comes to rest, imagine the plain of Troy once more, quiet, empty, softened by time. Grass grows where armies once stood. The sea moves gently against the shore. The walls are gone, but the earth remains. The story settles. The voices fade. The night deepens. Let your breathing slow. Let the rhythm of the ancient world carry you gently toward rest. The Trojan War drifts back into memory, softly, patiently, complete. When the fires finally burned low, Troy did not vanish all at once. Smoke lingered above the ruins, drifting slowly across shattered walls and collapsed roofs. The great towers that had once stood as symbols of strength now cast broken shadows across the ground. Ash settled softly, like gray snow, covering streets that had echoed with footsteps only days before. At dawn, the city was quiet. Those who remained moved carefully, stepping through debris, listening for sounds that might mean danger or survival. The war, so loud for so long, had ended not with triumph, but with stillness. The air itself felt heavy, as though the land were holding its breath. Among the survivors were men, women, and children who had hidden through the night. Some emerged from cellars and ruined homes. Others crept down from the hills where they had fled in desperation. They searched for one another, calling names softly, afraid to speak too loudly in case the silence broke again. Troy was gone. Among those who survived was Aeneas. He was not the greatest warrior of the war, nor the most cunning. He was known instead for something quieter, his sense of duty. To family, to gods, to fate itself. When Troy fell, Aeneas did not rush toward battle or revenge. Instead, he turned inward, listening for guidance. In the ancient telling, the gods had not abandoned him. They whispered through dreams, through signs, through the quiet pull of destiny. Aeneas gathered what mattered most. He lifted his father, Anchises, onto his shoulders, old, frail, carrying the memories of generations. He took his young son, Ascanius, by the hand, and he carried with him the sacred household gods of Troy, the Lares and Penates, symbols of continuity and belonging. Behind them, Troy smoldered. Ahead of them lay the unknown. The survivors gathered at the edge of the sea. They built ships not for war, but for escape. The wood was rough, the sails imperfect, but hope filled the empty spaces where certainty had once lived. As they departed, the shoreline of Troy grew smaller. The land that had defined them for generations faded into the horizon. No songs were sung, no cheers rose. Only the sound of water against hulls marked their passage. They were no longer Trojans of a city. They were wanderers. The journey that followed did not move in a straight line. The sea carried them to unfamiliar coasts. Some welcomed them, others feared them. Storms rose without warning, scattering ships, testing resolve. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into years. They stopped in Thrace, in Crete, in Sicily. In each place, signs appeared, omens that said this was not yet home. Graves were left behind. Children were born, leaders aged. Time passed differently at sea. Aeneas learned patience. In Carthage, they found rest. Queen Dido welcomed the Trojans with kindness. Her city was young, rising from the coast with promise and order. For a time, the wandering paused. Fires burned warmly. Stories were shared. Life felt almost whole again. Aeneas stayed, but fate did not. The gods reminded him of what lay ahead. Rome, though not yet named, waited beyond the horizon. A future city, born not from conquest, but endurance. Leaving Carthage was one of Aeneas's greatest trials. Not because of battle, but because of love and loss. Once again, he departed. At last, the signs changed. Dreams spoke of western lands. Oracles pointed toward the Tiber. The sea grew calmer, as though guiding rather than resisting them. When the Trojans reached the shores of Italy, they did not arrive as conquerors. They arrived tired, weathered, ready to settle. The land was fertile. Rivers flowed steadily. The air felt different, heavier, grounded. This was not Troy. This was King Latinus ruled the land of Latium. He did not greet the Trojans with fear. Prophecies had prepared him. He saw in Aeneas not an enemy, but a beginning. An alliance was formed, a marriage promised, a blending of peoples foretold. But peace, even here, did not come easily. Conflict followed, not for glory, but for belonging. When it ended, the Trojans remained. They built, they married, they planted roots. Troy lived again, not in stone, but in blood and memory. Aeneas's descendants ruled after him. They built Alba Longa. Generations passed. Names faded into legend, but the line endured. From this line, centuries later, twins would be born. After the death of Aeneas, his presence did not vanish from the world he had helped shape. Instead, it lingered quietly, carried forward through generations who no longer remembered Troy as a city of stone and towers, but as a distant origin, a place spoken of in stories rather than seen with the eyes. Aeneas's descendants ruled from Alba Longa, a city set among wooded hills and flowing springs. It was smaller than Troy, humbler in its architecture, but rich with memory. The kings who ruled there traced their bloodline carefully, naming fathers and sons, keeping alive the knowledge that they came from somewhere older, somewhere lost. Years passed, then decades, then centuries. The war that had once consumed the Aegean faded into legend. Names became echoes, heroes became symbols, yet the lineage endured, quietly, patiently, as if waiting for the right moment to rise again. In Alba Longa, power eventually fractured. A rightful king was overthrown by his brother, an act born not of necessity but of fear. The usurper, Amulius, feared the future, feared heirs who might one day reclaim what had been taken. And so, he acted to erase that future before it could begin. The king's daughter, Rhea Silvia, was forced into the role of a Vestal virgin, sworn to remain childless. It was meant to end the line quietly, but fate rarely accepts such plans. The ancient stories tell us that Mars, god of war, came to Rhea Silvia. Whether taken literally or symbolically, the result was the same. She bore twin sons, children born not of ambition, but of destiny. Their birth was a threat. The twins were taken from their mother. Rather than kill them outright, Amulius ordered them set adrift on the Tiber River. The act carried distance rather than finality, as though even cruelty hesitated in the face of prophecy. The river was swollen that day. Its waters moved slowly but with purpose, carrying the basket away from the city, away from danger, away from certainty. Reeds whispered as the basket drifted. Birds watched from branches. The world seemed to pause, holding its breath. Eventually, the basket caught along the riverbank. And there, in one of the most enduring images of ancient myth, the twins were found. A she-wolf came upon the children. In later retellings, she is fierce and protective. In others, gentle and watchful. She does not harm the infants. Instead, she feeds them, shelters them, guards them. Whether animal, symbol, or something between, the wolf represents survival, life continuing where it should not. Eventually, a shepherd named Faustulus discovered the children. He and his wife raised them quietly, away from the politics of kings and courts. The twins grew strong, curious, restless. They were named Romulus and Remus. As they grew, the twins stood apart from others. They were natural leaders, quick to act, confident in their movements. They defended shepherds from bandits, settled disputes, and drew others to them instinctively. And slowly, truth emerged. They learned who they were, where they came from, what had been taken from their family. Fate stirred once more. Romulus and Remus returned to Alba Longa, not as conquerors, but as restorers. Amulius was removed. The rightful line was reinstated. Order returned to the city without prolonged bloodshed. Yet the twins did not stay. Their destiny lay elsewhere. They returned to the place where the river had delivered them. There, they debated. They argued. They sought signs from the gods. Each saw a future, but not the same one. When conflict came, it was brief and tragic. Remus fell. Romulus stood alone. The city was founded. It was named Rome. Rome did not rise overnight. At first, it was a gathering of huts, a cluster of people bound by shared survival. But its story carried weight because it remembered Troy, not as a place of loss, but as a beginning. Rome would grow. It would change the world. But at its heart remained a simple truth. From ruin came endurance. And now, as this long journey reaches its end, allow the story to settle gently. From the burning towers of Troy, to the quiet wanderings of survivors, to the banks of a river, and the cry of newborn twins, to the first stones of a city that would one day shape history. The thread remains unbroken. You have traveled across seas and centuries, guided not by conquest, but by memory. Let the world grow quiet again. Let the past rest where it belongs, and let sleep come easily, carried on the slow rhythm of ancient time. And now, as this long journey comes to rest, allow the ancient world to settle gently back into silence. From the burning towers of Troy to the quiet banks of the Tiber, these stories have traveled across centuries to reach you here, not as battles or victories, but as echoes of endurance, memory, and time itself. Let the past fade softly into the distance, like a ship disappearing beyond the horizon. May your thoughts grow still, your breath slow and steady, and sleep come easily as the world of myth and history drifts quietly away. Good night.